Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day and welcome back to Mini Block Monday, where I teach you how to piece a miniature 3-inch quilt block. So this week's block is a monkey wrench. For this block you will need, in a white fabric color, cut one 2.5-inch square, cut one 2.25-inch square, cut one 1 3/4-inch square, and cut two 1-inch squares. And you will need to cut all of those shapes again in your medium purple fabric. The first step is to stitch a 4-patch out of your 1-inch squares. Arrange your pieces together with the white fabric in the upper right-hand corner and piece the squares together in sets of 2, then piece the 2 sets together, carefully matching that center seam. This is what it should look like once you get that stitched, and this should measure 1.5 inches square. Now you're going to take your purple 1 3/4-inch square and slice it in half to create 2 triangles. Fold these triangles in half to find a midpoint, and then you're going to line this up with 2 sides of your 4-patch unit. So just like that and like that. Now take this to your machine and you're going to stitch exactly 1/4 inch from both sides. This is what it will look like once you get that stitched. Go ahead and open out those triangles, finger press the seam allowance open, and go ahead and trim the seam allowance down. Again, anything that I feel like is going to finish at less than 1 inch wide, I always trim the seam allowance. And it really makes a difference. It will make your block everything lay down really nice and flat. Another thing that you'll want to trim up using a rotary cutter is these little flags that extend beyond the edges of your 4-patch. So just take this to your rotary cutter and mat, line up the edge of your ruler with the edge of the 4-patch, and cut off those little flags. And this is what it will look like when it's ready for the next step. Now you're going to take your white 1 3/4-inch square and slice it in half to create 2 triangles. Again, fold those triangles in half to find the midpoint and line up that midpoint with the seam of your center 4-patch. And you can already see that we're starting that monkey wrench pattern spinning around the center 4-patch. So I'm going to line both of these up, and if you're using fabrics that have a right and wrong side, just remember that it's always right sides together. Now I'm going to take this to my machine and stitch exactly 1/4 inch to both sides of this unit. So this is what our monkey wrench looks like at this stage, but we intentionally pieced this just a little bit too big, so that way we can trim it down really accurately for the next row of triangles. So I'm going to place my ruler on top, and yes, my ruler is upside down just to reduce glare so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm lining this up so that the 1/4 inch marks are lining up with the points of the 4-patch. So lining that up really nicely, and then I'm going to trim just one side at a time, just like so. Then I'll rotate the block and rotate my ruler. Line everything up again, and see now I can actually slip my ruler down and line up a thin line on the ruler with that edge I've just cut, and that helps me to be just a little bit more accurate. But you see I've also slipped down so I don't have 1/4 inch marks. I want those. So you just have to learn how to manipulate your ruler and get it into the position that you want it in. And I want 1/4 inch marks on both sides of that 4-patch. I also want something lined up with this bottom edge, so that looks good. So now I'll rotate again. This time I can line up the 2-inch mark over here and a thin line on my ruler over here. And this should be lining up. Well, let's slide it down just a little bit more. I can line up that 2-inch mark. I can line up a whole number mark, and I will get a nice 1/4 inch mark on that 4-patch corner. There we go. And if things start to get off just a little bit, or you can't line everything up, just really go back to your fabric prep. That's always the most important thing, is to check in on how you're prepping your fabric. If you're finding it difficult to be accurate, and if you're finding it difficult to get your points out pointy, then try starching and pressing your fabric. It really can make a big difference before cutting. Okay, one last side. It's all trimmed up now to exactly 2 inches square. So here is what your monkey wrench will look like at this stage. And now you're going to take your purple 2¼ inch square and slice that in half to create 2 triangles. And just like before, find the midpoints of both of these triangles, find the midpoint of the center of your unit, and line these up, right sides together. Take this to your machine and stitch exactly 1/4 inch to both sides, and then press the seam allowances open, then trim off the little flags that extend. And here's what it looks like once you get those triangles stitched on and the little flags trimmed off. Now you're going to take your white 2¼ inch square and also slice it in half to create 2 triangles. Again, find the midpoints of your triangles and your block, line these up, and stitch exactly 1/4 inch to both sides. And here's what it will look like after you get those white triangles stitched. Take this to your cutting mat and trim it down to measure exactly 2 5/8. Again, making sure to line up your ruler so that you have exactly 1/4 inch from these points. You have little points here, here, and here. It's almost like a square and a square. It is a square and a square, basically. So line up those points with the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler as you trim this up to measure exactly 2 5/8 inches square. So we're ready to start our next row of triangles around our monkey wrench. You're going to need your purple 2½ inch square. Again, slice that in half to create 2 triangles. Fold those in half to find the midpoints. Fold your block in half to find the midpoints. And this is where you're going to want to piece those on. Make sure, as you are attaching your triangles, that they are continuing with the pattern that you've established for your monkey wrench. It should be spinning outward in 2 directions. If you piece it to the opposite sides, it doesn't really work all that well. So double check yourself, layer these on right sides together, take it to your machine, stitch exactly 1/4 inch to both sides. And here's what it will look like after you get the little flags trimmed off on both sides. Then you're going to take your remaining white 2½ inch square, slice that in half diagonally to create 2 more triangles, and I bet you can guess what you're going to do. Fold them in half to find the midpoints, line up the midpoints with your block, stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. And here's what your monkey wrench will look like once you get those last triangles pieced. And of course, it is going to run a little bit big, so take it to your rotary cutter, trim it down to measure exactly 3½ inches square. And if you'd like to find a much more detailed tutorial with each of those steps so that you can see the trimming with each row, check out my square and a square tutorial. You can find this linked up at leahday.com/mini.